Imagine a child, barely 3 years old, begging for love, her tiny voice drowned out by screams of violence. This wasn't an accident. This was supposed to be an exorcism gone horrifyingly wrong. But what happened to little Relly in that quiet San Jose home will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about faith, family, and trust. Aureli's last words were, "I love you," whispered to the person she trusted most, her own mother. Yet those words didn't stop the unspeakable abuse that lasted over 12 hours. A ritual meant to save her soul ended up claiming her life, leaving scars that no court can truly erase. How could love turn into such unimaginable cruelty? And just when it seemed like this horrifying tragedy had reached its shocking conclusion, investigators uncovered a clue so unexpected. It flipped the case on its head. Could this tiny piece of evidence finally reveal the full truth behind Aureli's death? Or would it only deepen the mystery? What if everything you thought you knew about her mother's actions was about to change? Picture a small, dimly lit room, almost like a private chapel, where whispers of faith collided with screams of pain. The innocence of a child trapped in a ritual she didn't understand, a family bound by belief, but shattered by horror. Now imagine that one single clue emerging from the shadows, turning an investigation upside down, shocking the entire community, and leaving law enforcement scrambling. Just as the case of 3-year-old Aureli seemed almost solved, investigators found a shocking new clue, one that would change everything and shake the entire courtroom to its core. Who really bears the responsibility for this tragedy? Could this have been prevented? And what does this case reveal about the blurred line between faith and fanaticism? Stay with us as we unravel the chilling events leading up to Aureli's death, the courtroom battles, the shocking evidence, and the haunting twist that no one saw coming. Aureli, a 3-year-old female child, resided in San Jose, California, at the time of the events that precipitated her death. Official documents from the Santa Clara County Police Department and archived court filings indicate that Aureli lived with her mother, Claudia Elisa Hernandez, her father, and an older sibling in a private residential property that incorporated a small, semi-public space designated by the family as a chapel for religious observances. Public reporting identifies Aureli as the sole victim of the incident that occurred on the premises, would have been characterized in legal proceedings as an extended ritualistic exorcism conducted over a sustained period exceeding 12 hours. The child's birth date is recorded in court filings and police reports, but for confidentiality, it is represented in public reporting as 2019, making her 3 years of age at the time of the incident in 2022. Aureli's personal medical records, as cited in legal documents, indicate that she had no significant pre-existing medical conditions that would have predisposed her to sudden critical health events, and her developmental milestones were reported as typical for her age. The child's social interactions were primarily limited to immediate family members, and public sources suggest no prior involvement with child protective services. Initial statements from the family, as documented in police affidavits, indicate that Aureli's mother and father regarded the child's behavior through a religious lens, interpreting minor childish behaviors as potential evidence of spiritual possession. The family's religious practice, identified as Pentecostal in court filings, involved prayer sessions and rituals intended to remove perceived malevolent influences. Aureli's interactions with the family during these sessions reportedly included physical restraint and verbal commands, which her parents believed were necessary to extract an alleged spiritual entity. Public reporting confirms that these interactions occurred regularly, but escalated to a fatal incident on the date of the investigation. It is notable that Aureli's final attempts to communicate distress were ignored. Police reports indicate that during the extended ritual, the child attempted verbal communication with her mother, reportedly stating, "I love you," while exhibiting clear signs of respiratory distress. A suspense line from corroborated witness statements and medical documentation reveals that the child's condition deteriorated rapidly. Despite the continued ritualistic activity, the forensic documentation indicates that the child exhibited multiple internal and external trauma indicators consistent with prolonged physical restraint. The autopsy and subsequent forensic review confirmed that the child's death resulted from asphyxiation associated with prolonged restraint and forced oral interventions. While the term exorcism appears in numerous police reports and legal filings, investigators emphasize that the ritualistic context does not alter the physical mechanisms leading to death. The records describe internal hemorrhaging and craniofacial trauma consistent with sustained application of pressure, particularly during attempts to forcibly open the child's oral cavity, rehooking to maintain investigatory focus. Public documentation clarifies that Aureli's identity as a 3-year-old victim has been central to legal proceedings, specifically in evaluating the proportionality of parental actions against established child abuse statutes. Court filings also indicate that the child's death has been designated as a felony homicide under California Penal Code sections governing murder and child endangerment. The investigative consensus underscores that Aureli was a minor, fully dependent on her guardians, and had no means to protect herself from the actions undertaken by her parents. Her identity as the sole victim of the incident remains undisputed in public reporting, and her case serves as the central evidentiary focal point for all ongoing legal proceedings against the family members implicated. The incident involving Aureli occurred within a private section of the family residence in San Jose, California, on a date publicly identified as occurring in late 2022. Law enforcement and court documents indicate that the mother, Claudia Elisa Hernandez, the father, and older sibling participated in the sequence of actions categorized as a ritualistic exorcism, which spanned over 12 continuous hours. The purpose, according to statements recovered during interviews and recorded in affidavits, was a removal of an alleged spiritual possession from Aureli, who was perceived by family members as exhibiting behaviors indicative of malevolent influence. The procedure, as documented in the official investigative report, involved repeated physical restraint, forced oral interventions, and sustained application of pressure to the chest and neck regions. Forensic records indicate that these measures were maintained throughout the extended session, resulting in progressive respiratory compromise. Police records note that while the child demonstrated repeated attempts at verbal communication, including the statement, "I love you," directed at her mother, the actions continued unaltered. Court records highlight that the child exhibited physiological signs of acute distress. Respiratory monitoring, as documented post-mortem, confirmed asphyxial injury consistent with external manual pressure and obstruction of the oral cavity. Forensic pathology noted petechial hemorrhages and other indicators consistent with asphyxiation. Investigators documented that the father and sibling assisted in restraining Aureli to facilitate the ritual, which include the insertion of objects or fingers into the oral cavity in attempts to remove perceived toxic or spiritual material. Multiple sources, including police affidavits and court exhibits, corroborate these actions, which cumulatively contributed to the fatal outcome. A graphic line in court testimony describes how the child's body exhibited multiple internal trauma indicators, including thoracic compression injuries and soft tissue bruising, consistent with prolonged restraint and repeated application of force. Medical records describe that the child's airway obstruction was unrelieved, resulting in hypoxia and eventual cardiac arrest. Autopsy findings confirmed pulmonary edema and other acute asphyxial markers, and no pre-existing medical conditions were found that would have contributed to the death. Rehooking to maintain attention. The sequence of events is reconstructed from interviews, and forensic evidence demonstrates that the child's death occurred despite the absence of external blunt force trauma sufficient alone to cause mortality. Investigators concluded that the fatality was directly associated with a combination of sustained restraint, oral manipulation, and prolonged ritualistic activity. By the conclusion of the crime reconstruction, public reporting emphasizes that the incident met the statutory requirements for first-degree murder and child abuse charges under California law. The legal assessment designates the mother as a primary actor in initiating and maintaining the actions that led to the child's death, with the father and sibling listed as accessory participants. The incident remains classified as a premeditated sequence of actions with fatal consequences, resulting from prolonged, physically imposed constraints. Police reports and court filings indicate that evidence collected at the scene included digital recordings of the child's interactions during the ritual, physical examination of the child's body post-mortem, and photographic documentation of the interior space designated as a chapel. Statements from first responding officers, documented in body cam footage, indicate that the child's condition was consistent with acute asphyxiation and prolonged restraint. Forensic services reported that biological samples yielded partial markers and no unique DNA profile to conclusively attribute all physical evidence to a specific actor. Contamination risk was identified due to the presence of multiple individuals and environmental variables within the residence. Investigators documented that items used during the ritual, including manual restraints and improvised instruments, were submitted to the crime laboratory. Forensic assessment indicated that trace fluids were present, but the evidentiary threshold for establishing a definitive causal link between each item and the child's injuries was not fully met. The investigative record indicates that witness statements provided partial corroboration of a sequence of actions. The mother, Claudia Elisa Hernandez, filed a motion in the Superior Court to dismiss charges, arguing that religious practices and cultural background created an undue burden on her defense. Public reporting notes that legal experts characterize a motion under the Racial Justice Act as inconclusive in relation to the specific charges of murder and child abuse, citing statutory limitations regarding religious protection. Is that law enforcement obtained digital communications suggesting prior family belief in spiritual possession. Yet investigators indicated that the content could not be independently verified as directly influencing the fatal incident. The body cam footage and recorded statements provide critical context, but require cautious interpretation, as a precise timing and sequence of actions could not be established with absolute certainty. Forensic analysis further notes that the child's internal trauma indicators were consistent with extended restraint, but could not uniquely differentiate between specific participants. Investigators highlighted that the father and siblings' involvement in restraining the child, while documented, did not allow definitive attribution of causality for each individual act, given overlapping durations and simultaneous application of force. Legal proceedings indicate that Claudia Elisa Hernandez remains the primary defendant in Santa Clara County Superior Court, facing first-degree murder and aggravated child abuse charges. The father and sibling are designated as co-defendants under accessory liability statutes. The mother's motion to dismiss charges, citing religious practice under the Racial Justice Act, was recorded on January 5, 2023, and remains under judicial consideration. Court filings indicate that the Act does not extend detections for religious belief in criminal homicide cases. The prosecution has submitted affidavits and forensic reports documenting 12 hours of sustained abuse, along with body cam evidence and medical documentation. The defense has raised procedural arguments challenging potential bias, but public reporting indicates that such challenges have not yet resulted in dismissal or acquittal. Prosecutors have requested pre-trial hearings to evaluate admissibility of certain digital communications, with court dates scheduled intermittently through 2023. The case has drawn attention for the intersection of religious practice and criminal liability, but the evidence continues to meet statutory thresholds for prosecution. Public reporting confirms that the child's death is legally classified as homicide with potential sentencing of 25 years to life. Court documents reflect ongoing debate regarding the weight of digital and physical evidence in corroborating participant culpability. From an investigative perspective, the available evidence indicates that the child's death resulted from prolonged restraint and forceful oral intervention within a ritualistic context. The mother appears as a principal actor, with a father and sibling in supportive roles, though the evidentiary threshold for attributing specific injuries to individual actors remains inconclusive. Public reporting and forensic documentation suggests that the combination of physical actions, while framed as religiously motivated, meets statutory definitions for homicide. It is significant that the defense's arguments under the Racial Justice Act do not align with existing statutory protections for religious belief in criminal homicide cases. The forensic analysis demonstrates that while the child's injuries are extensive, definitive causation attribution for each participant is partially inconclusive. The sustained duration of restraint, coupled with repeated oral manipulation, establishes sufficient causal linkage to the fatal outcome. My opinion, based on the assembled documentation, is that the case illustrates the intersection of belief systems with legal responsibility. The child's vulnerability and the failure of parental oversight created circumstances that culminated in fatality. The forensic, testimonial, and digital evidence collectively support the likelihood of legal culpability, while acknowledging remaining uncertainties regarding precise sequence attribution. Probability suggests that prosecution has sufficient foundation for conviction. Yet evidentiary gaps maintain areas of unresolved forensic ambiguity. The killing of 3-year-old Aurelie remains under judicial review, with multiple legal motions pending and evidentiary hearings scheduled throughout 2023. The child's death isn't confirmed as resulting from sustained restraint and forced oral intervention during a ritualistic exorcism. The mother, father, and sibling remain subject to prosecution for first-degree murder and aggravated child abuse. It is notable that forensic attribution of individual acts remains partially inconclusive. Though the overall fatal sequence is well documented, court proceedings continue to address admissibility of evidence, including body cam footage, forensic reports, and digital communications. Public reporting suggests that potential sentences range from 25 years to life, contingent upon court rulings and jury evaluation. Without physical evidence conclusively isolating each participant, the precise details of culpability are likely to remain partially unresolved. Probability suggests that the mother will bear principal responsibility, with accessory liability assigned to other family members, but evidentiary gaps maintain areas of ambiguity. The case remains under active investigation and judicial consideration, and the ultimate determination of criminal accountability is not finalized. The circumstances surrounding Aureli's death, particularly the intersection of ritualistic practice and prolonged restraint, remain a subject of forensic and legal scrutiny.